As we celebrate 175 glorious years of Relief Society, we will reflect on what was happening in each era and meet the 16 women who have led this amazing organization and oldest society. We begin in Nauvoo. The Nauvoo area was first called Quashkima, named in honor of a Native American chief. In late 1839, arriving Mormons bought the small town, and in April 1840 it was renamed Nauvoo by Joseph Smith. The word comes from Isaiah, "How beautiful upon the mountains." It is notable that by 1844, Nauvoo's population had swollen to 12,000 people, rivaling the size of Chicago at the time. The first Relief Society president was Emma Smith. The Female Relief Society of Nauvoo was formed on March 17, 1842. The prophet Joseph Smith had promised to organize the women after the pattern of the priesthood. In that first meeting, Emma told the women, "We are going to do something extraordinary." She was instrumental in the coming forth of the word of wisdom, and in 1843 she organized a visiting committee, the beginnings of visiting teaching, and she compiled the first church hymnal. After the organization of the Relief Society at Nauvoo, the sisters enjoyed several years of work and sisterhood. Yet, after the death of the prophet Joseph Smith, the Relief Society was officially disbanded. Over the next 23 years, while not formally organized, LDS women kept the spirit of the Relief Society alive through their constant works of charity amongst themselves and for the Native American populations that they encountered on their exodus west. Then, in 1866, Brigham Young asked Eliza R. Snow if she would help to officially reorganize the Relief Society again and serve as its second president. When Eliza R. Snow took the helm of the newly reinstated Relief Society, the nation was recovering from the Civil War. The westward movement of saints was still continuing, and Union Pacific completed the first Continental Railroad. Linoleum, margarine, and root beer were now new novelties, and children were introduced to roller skates. During her time as General Relief Society president, Eliza not only rekindled the spirit of Relief Society, but she also organized the primary and the Young Ladies Mutual Improvement Association, which later became the Young Women's and Mutual programs. She started the Women's Exponent, a newspaper run by the Mormon women, and also helped to establish Deseret Hospital. Though never a mother herself, she possessed many gifts of the Spirit and was a great supporter of womanhood and motherhood. Eliza was a talented poetess, and she used her poetry to strengthen the saints. In all, she left a legacy of some 500 poems. She served as president for 21 years. Said Eliza, "There are many of the sisters whose labors are not known beyond their own dwellings and perhaps not appreciated there. But what difference does that make? If your labors are acceptable to God, however simple the duties, if faithfully performed, you should never be discouraged." When Zina Diantha Huntington Young was called to be the third president of the Relief Society, it was called the era of the gay 90s, and it was noted for many new inventions. The bustle, the bicycle, and the zipper, to mention a few. Women fainted a lot, which may have had something to do with the fad of forcing women to have 18-inch waists, enforced by steel corsets. Basketball and player pianos were invented, and the Spanish-American War gave us new territories. Everyone read about Wyatt Earp, Annie Oakley, Calamity Jane, and Billy the Kid. The barbershop quartet was popular entertainment. The Manti and the Salt Lake City temples were dedicated, and upon completion, the Salt Lake Temple became the symbol of the church for many. The manifesto and ending plural marriage was issued, and Utah was granted statehood in 1896. Zina was trained as a midwife and did much during her time as Relief Society president to improve medical care for the saints. She was also the first matron of the Salt Lake City Temple and always bore strong testimony of the divinity of the work she was engaged in. Zina said, "From the day I received the sweet testimony of the Spirit, when grasping the precious Book of Mormon in my hands to my breast, I have never doubted nor faltered in my faith. Seek for a testimony as you would, my dear sisters, for a diamond concealed." When Bathsheba W. Smith, our fourth president, was called, the 20th century had just begun. Gibson girls were the standard of fashion, and the Wright brothers had just made history at Kitty Hawk with an odd-looking bicycle with wings. Yes, the beginning of the airplane. The Model T roared through the streets at 10 miles per hour, and teddy bears named after President Theodore Roosevelt were all the rage. The Relief Society opened a nursing school and a mother's class. They were the forerunners of the homemaking and enrichment program. Bathsheba believed that one of the most important things she could do as Relief Society president was serving in the temple, and she did this until her death in 1910. From Bathsheba we hear, "When I first heard the gospel, I knew it was true. When I first read the Book of Mormon, I knew it was inspired of God. When I first beheld Joseph Smith, I knew I stood face to face with a prophet of the living God, and I had no doubt in my mind about his authority." The world was really in motion when Emmeline B. Wells was called to be the fifth president of the Relief Society. In 1912, the unsinkable Titanic sank after hitting an iceberg. In 1917, the United States entered World War I, and the Spanish flu claimed thousands of lives. Prohibition was enforced, and in 1920, women gained the right to vote. Emmeline was a strong leader in the national women's suffrage movement. She was good friends with Susan B. Anthony and spoke on behalf of Mormon women in Washington, D.C. During her time as Relief Society president, visiting teaching messages were introduced, and the Relief Society organized the Social Services Department of the church. As World War I progressed, the sisters supported the war effort by selling 200,000 bushels of wheat to the U.S. government that had been stored under Sister Wells' direction. At age 93, Emmeline was released as Relief Society president just 3 weeks before her death. Her good friend described her as our little, delicate, great-minded president, walking softly, yet with fierce independence, into the room. From Emmeline, we hear, "I believe in women. I desire to do all in my power to help elevate the condition of people, especially women, to do those things that would advance women in moral and spiritual, as well as educational work, and tend to the rolling on of the work of God upon the earth." The Roaring Twenties brought a time of general prosperity and peace. For women, knee-length skirts and dresses became socially acceptable, as did bobbed hair with a Marcel wave. The women who pioneered these trends were frequently referred to as flappers. Jazz was becoming big, and concerns for communists associating with Russia began. The era saw large-scale adoptions of automobiles, telephones, motion pictures, radio, and household electricity, as well as a huge industrial growth, accelerated consumer demand and aspirations, and significant changes in lifestyle and culture. The media began to focus on celebrities, especially sports heroes and movie stars. Large baseball stadiums were built in major U.S. cities, in addition to palatial cinemas. It was during this time Clarissa Smith Williams was called to be the 6th president of the Relief Society. Clarissa was the mother of 11 children, and despite her great leadership abilities, the role of wife and mother took priority in her life. During her time as president of the Relief Society, the welfare department services were expanded. Primary Children's Hospital was opened. General Conference was now broadcast on the radio, and the Arizona and Alberta temples were dedicated. Clarissa said, "The greatest thing in the world is love." After all of the prosperity and building of the 20s, it wasn't long after Louise Yates Robinson was called to be the 7th General President of the Relief Society that the U.S. stock market crashed and threw the U.S. into a deep depression. Amidst the hardships of depression, things like the Lone Ranger radio program blossomed, as did Monopoly, Bisquick, and Shirley Temple, with little girls everywhere wearing ringlets. The music and the spoken word with Richard L. Evans began in 1930, and the church welfare program was organized. The first Deseret Industries opened, and the Hill Cumorah pageant was performed for the very first time. In 1939, the famous movie Gone with the Wind, starring Vivien Leigh and Clark Gable, made its debut. It was in 1931 that the Relief Society Board decided that the blue and gold would be the colors associated with Relief Society. Louise had a big heart and had great compassion for the women of the church and the things that they were suffering because of the Depression. She organized Mormon Handicraft Shop as an outlet for handiwork done by the women in the home to supplement the family income. She was also painfully shy. Her daughter once said of her, "I have never known a woman who was more eager to avoid the limelight." So I can imagine what courage and trust in her Father in heaven it took for her to preside over and conduct a large conference of women, or to meet with the highest officials of the state and nation and represent them throughout the world. Louise's personal motto was, "Welcome the task that takes you beyond yourself." When Amy Brown Lyman was called in 1940, our 8th Relief Society president could spend a nickel and buy cupcakes, a bag of candy, the newspaper, or make a phone call. Nylon stockings were becoming affordable. Swing dancing was big, as were tailored suits with large shoulder pads. World War II was in full swing, and gasoline, tires, soap, sugar, flour, and butter were hard to come by. Everyone remembered where they were when they heard the news about Pearl Harbor, December 7, 1941. It was also in 1941 that the Relief Society emblem came into existence. During the 5 years of her service, her board faced particularly hard circumstances. Welfare needs were high, and so Relief Society programs and activities had to be scaled back. The Relief Society held its centennial celebration, but on a very small budget. Amy also faced much personal hardship in her life. Yet despite her challenges, she put her faith and trust in the Lord. Amy said this, "My testimony has been my anchor and my stay, my satisfaction in times of joy and gladness, my comfort in times of sorrow and discouragement. I honor beyond my power of expression this great sisterhood of service." Belle Smith Spafford was called to be the 9th Relief Society president in 1945. The war had ended, and servicemen were returning home to their families. Tract homes and neighborhoods were popping up as the population exploded. TV entered into many homes now, and margarine came in white bricks where you had to tint it with yellow powder. The latest fashions were poodle skirts, bobby socks, saddle oxfords, and ponytails. The church took a lead in post-war aid by sending supplies to saints in Europe. In 1949, television broadcasts of conference began, and Family Home Evening was inaugurated. Over the 30 years that Bell served as president, she saw many changes in the world and in the church. In the early 50s, we had the introduction of the pacemaker, polio, measles, and mumps vaccines. In 1954, Burger King hits the scene. In the 1960s, the world was full of turbulence and accomplishments. There were assassinations and riots. We went from the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, to Nixon and Watergate. From beatniks and hippies to war protests, Vietnam, Woodstock, and the introduction to LSD and other drugs. There were also great events such as the first man on the moon in 1969. In 1970, the first pocket calculator is introduced. The Beatles now become the new heartthrob of young girls, and miniskirts and go-go boots were popular for young women. Bell encouraged sisters to dare to be different and not succumb to worldly invitations. She was the longest-serving president of the Relief Society, and she served under 6 prophets. Said Bell, "I have learned the greatness of the priesthood of God." The first 7 years of Barbara Bradshaw Smith's time as the 10th president of the Relief Society were filled with media attention and controversy over the Equal Right Amendment. Women struggled to understand what their roles were in society and within the church. During these hard times for women, she bore strong testimony of women's divine roles and their importance in the world and in God's plan. Barbara said, "I really believe that those years of my administration, when women's issues were so prominent, were very critical in the history of the world. The women who lived through those years of turmoil need to know that how they lived their lives was important, and to recognize their place in history." During her 10 years as president, the church experienced immense global growth. In 1979, the 1,000th stake was organized, and Barbara traveled to nearly every continent. Also during her time, the revelation of the priesthood for our black brothers was received, and the church celebrated its sesquicentennial. This was also the era of big hair, and in 1980, St. Helen erupts, killing 30. The Love Boat sails through another TV season, and we find out who Luke's father is in The Empire Strikes Back, and we all sang along with Bette Midler. Gas is now 62 cents a gallon, and a burger is just 14 cents. 8-track tapes were the thing to own. Said Barbara, "Relief Society is God's gift to his daughters." In 1984, Reagan becomes the 40th president. We all watch Ghostbusters, the Olympics, and furry little gremlins got into everything. Gandhi was assassinated, and Madonna hit the music charts. The Dallas, Texas temple opened, and in 1990, President Benson turned 91. The Philippines experienced a 7.7 earthquake, and pioneers marched through the Salt Lake Valley, marking 143 years since the arrival of the first group of saints. Under the leadership of Barbara Woodhead Winder, the 11th president, Relief Society programs were reduced, and scaled back to accommodate the needs of a worldwide church. Barbara reminded the sisters of what Joseph Smith had said 100 years before, that the society is not only to relieve the poor, but to save souls. Sister Barbara Winder said this: "It is vital that all sisters have a visiting teacher." When Elaine Lowe Jack became the 12th president of the Relief Society in 1990, she became the leader of a truly worldwide Relief Society. She initiated gospel literacy effort in order to help sisters all over the world to fully understand and participate in the gospel. It was also during this time that the family, a proclamation to the world, was first read in General Relief Society meeting. 1990 also meant that gas was $1.05 a gallon and the average income was $30,000 a year. We loved the movies Home Alone and Dances with Wolves, with Phil Collins and Janet Jackson's music hitting the #1 chart. Bill Clinton is now president, and the largest mall of America is opening, spanning 78 acres. 1997 meant that Hong Kong was returned to Chinese rule, and we have the first female Secretary of State in history. Microsoft is also the most valuable company at $261 billion, and apostles are now traveling frequently worldwide, and the church membership is growing at a very fast rate. Elaine said this: "We are part of a grand whole. We need each other to make our sisterhood complete. When we reach out to clasp the hands of our sisters, we reach to every continent, for we are of every nation. We are bonded as we try to understand what the Lord has to say to us, what He will make of us. We speak in different tongues, yet we are a family who can still be of one heart. We work, we play, give birth, nurture, dream dreams. We cry, pray, laugh, sometimes clap for joy, and find that mortality teaches us our need for our Savior, Jesus Christ." On the dawn of a new millennium, Mary Ellen Wood Smoot, the 13th leader of the Relief Society, encouraged sisters to gain new skills to strengthen home and family. The homemaking program was reorganized to become the Home, Family, and Personal Enrichment Program. Mary Ellen and her counselors also welcomed the world to Salt Lake City during the 2002 Winter Olympics. The rapid building of smaller temples began, and church membership reached over 11 million, with the majority outside of the United States. Mary Ellen Wood Smoot adopted for her presidency the motto of President J. Reuben Clark, Jr., when he said, "The task ahead of us is never as great as the power behind us." When Bonnie D. Parkin was called as the 14th president of the Relief Society, Prophet Gordon B. Hinckley gave her an impassioned mandate. He said, "The older sisters in Relief Society must move out of their comfort zones. They must reach out to these younger sisters, making them feel comfortable. They need to help them learn to love Relief Society." As a result, Bonnie focused her administration on helping young women gain a love for Relief Society and to feel welcome there. She also adapted the needs of the enrichment program and started the Good News Moment to help sisters increase their feelings of sisterhood. Bonnie said, "I have learned that when two hearts connect, age is irrelevant. We desperately need more connections between young and old. And no matter our age, our needs are the same, aren't they? As Relief Society sisters support each other, we share our faith, friendship, and love." Julie B. Beck was called as the 15th president of the Relief Society in 2007. As general president, she and her counselors have traveled all over the world visiting sisters. Under her direction, the Home, Family, and Personal Enrichment Program was dissolved, and instead, meetings are now simply called Relief Society meetings. Her emphasis has been on helping sisters understand their roles as women and increase their spirituality. Things were happening in the world as well. The final Harry Potter book was published, and Spider-Man and Ratatouille were the popular movies. Apple introduces the iPhone, and earthquakes, tornadoes, fires, tropical storms, and a major drought hit across the continent, causing major wheat shortages. Your income was $50,000 a year now, and gas is at $3.38 a gallon. Sister Julie Beck said this: "The ability to qualify for, receive, and act on personal revelation is the single most important skill that can be acquired in this life." As our current General Relief Society President, Linda K. Burton, has put great emphasis on going to or getting temple worthy. She is a great proponent of being prepared and building our food storages. Sister Burton says, "If we do all we can and put our trust in Him, the Lord makes up the difference." As I have read and studied the lives of these great women, my heart soars with appreciation and love for them. As you heard, tremendous changes have taken place in the world since Relief Society was founded, but I don't think any change in the world has been more significant than the change in the status of women. At the time the Relief Society was founded, a woman's world was her home, her family, and perhaps a little community service. Today, a woman's world is as broad as the universe. There's scarcely an arena that a woman cannot enter if she has the will to do so. Yet, in the midst of all this change, the organizational structure of the Relief Society, the basic purpose for which it was established, has remained constant, and the church programs that have implemented these purposes have been adapted to the needs of women in each succeeding era. Through the years, Relief Society has been just as constant in its purpose as the gospel and truth is constant. The purposes that were important for a handful of women in Nauvoo are still important to women worldwide. That is the miracle of Relief Society.